Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. You are hearing the voice of Malika Rollins, and I'm the Director of Industry and Education at DOCNYC. You will soon see my face in a moment. Welcome to Cutting Apart, Remote Collaboration for Editor-Director Teams. I would like to introduce briefly our speakers. We have two filmmakers who have joined us, who will be joining us, Shazak Sanuda and Derek Boonstra. And then we have two editors who will be joining us as well, Sarah Noonans and Claire Ave Lalamont. And it's really just lovely to have all of you here, so welcome. So, it's really important for DOCNYC as well as many organizations to acknowledge the land that we sit on, and the land that we're on is the unceded land of the Lenape people. But we also acknowledge that we still need to take time to dive into specifically and concretely what kind of role we can play as a film festival to understand the current day impacts of colonialism, especially on our fellow Indigenous documentary filmmakers. And that's a process I started a few months ago that I'm still involved with, and hopefully I will have some conclusions or some suggestions soon. DOCNYC is very committed to making our pro events accessible to everyone, including by providing live ASL interpretation if you had requested it, or in the future if you request it. Zoom has a live captioning option. We will do visual descriptions of ourselves, and I will demonstrate that first. And you will also be getting not only a copy of the recording, but a copy of the transcript as well. Whoops, sorry, my slides are having a problem here. So like I said, welcome. It's lovely to almost see you all here today. We'd love you to, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, and especially put your purpose for joining us today, because that helps us to make sure that we're staying on point for the sharing that you will hear. We're recording, and really important, put all questions in the Q&A feature, and we will take questions as we go. Again, all questions in the Q&A feature, please. And if you forget, don't worry, we will remind you. And lastly, just a little bit of a future look. We have our amazing DOCNYC Film Festival coming up. It is the 9th to 17th of November. It's our 13th edition. It's in New York City. And we will soon put some links into the chat for you. You are welcome to buy tickets for our conference, which I curate along with my team of helpers, if you will, and people who help me brainstorm and curate it. And then also our festival industry accreditation applications are open as well. So we'll put links in the chat to both of those for you. And again, it's lovely to have you here. I'll do a quick visual description of myself, and I'll introduce our speakers and ask them to do a quick one of themselves. I'm a light-skinned African-American woman. I have silver hoop earrings, tortoiseshell glasses, blondish brown hair, and a blue necklace. And my background is kind of beige with a lamp behind me. Let's invite Claire on first and ask her to do a brief visual description of herself.
Hello. Claire Ave Lalamont. I use pronouns she, her. I'm wearing a nice dressy black top for the occasion, curly hair, light skin, an empty cat tree behind me, which unfortunately I've closed the door, so we will not be joined. But I'm looking forward to chatting.
And Shazak, can you come on and do a brief visual description of yourself, please?
Hi there, I'm Shazak Sanuda, and I am an African-American woman, fair-skinned, with long pointy earrings, a couple of gold necklaces, a tank top, a sweater, and lots of, I don't know, plants and things behind me going on.
Lovely. Sarah, can you join us, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Sarah Newens, and I am a nearly translucent white woman who is popping in here from my sister's cottage in her backyard. It's like a little tiny little room, and I have longish blondish brown hair, and I'm wearing black rimmed glasses, and I am not wearing any jewelry today, which is rare.
Lovely. Thanks, Sarah. And Derek, our last filmmaker.
Hi, Derek, Caucasian guy with the beard. I'm in unceded Tonga land in Burbank, California, and I have a cat on a blanket behind me. He's looking at a UFO up there.
Wonderful. So welcome everyone. We're going to start off with our filmmakers and our editors, just briefly kind of sharing with us what you look for in collaborating on a director-editor team. You know, it is so important for teams to work in a healthy and productive fashion, to have conversations before, during, and maybe even after you work on a project together. And especially in this day and age when a lot of us are not together physically. So I'm wondering if you could help the audience hear your perspective about what are some of the best ways to begin a really sure-footed relationship as a director and editor. What do you look for in the collaborative process? Anyone is welcome to kind of jump in there.
I'm happy to dive in first. So I consider myself still more of an emerging editor. The film with Shazak was actually my first solo feature that I was able to edit. And so, you know, I have a history of several projects under my belt, but I felt like I was still learning with each one. I still am. But something that I've come to realize is how important it is who you're working with. Your day-to-day dynamic really is, to me, as important as the subject that you're working on and why you might want to work on a specific subject. So, you know, I have definitely learned that kind of vetting how you get along on like a person-to-person basis, you know, like how do you speak to people is a part of collaborating. And, you know, do you speak with respect, and are you looking for someone to, you know, be in a real conversation with you, offer opinions? You know, I would never want to just be a button pusher. So that was sort of one of the first things that I'm looking for, is like, are you looking to kind of come from on high and say, do it this way and this is how it goes? Or are you coming in saying, hey, this is what I want. I think we can get there. I just want to figure out how together. So that's where I've been learning and starting to realize that, like, vetting that in the interview process is a really big deal for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, it's just as important to talk about workflow as it is about the subject matter, and make sure that those things can align. Although it's hard to tell until you really start working with somebody. So if it's a first time collaboration, a lot of times I like to see if it's possible to do like a trial period to make sure that like communication styles line up, that, you know, storytelling sensibility lines up. It's also really helpful to talk to other people who have collaborated with a director before, or a lot of times I'll come in, you know, partway through a project and pick up where an edit has left off, which can be really helpful, because then, for example, I just came in on a series really to help push to the finish line the last like 8 weeks. And I watched the whole cut, and before the director, you know, who was having a hard time finding somebody available at the last minute and was probably ready to just grab anybody, I was like, I'm actually going to talk through all the things that I would do to this cut to make sure that this aligns with your vision. And I think as much as specific as possible to get about those storytelling things are really important. But then also, like, you know, stamina and, you know, burnout are a real part of this process. So having those boundaries in place as best as possible in terms of what the expectations are.
Yeah, I want to like definitely second the idea of talking about your working style with your collaborator, and as you know, as nitty gritty and specific as kind of hours per day, how I like to work. Are you going to be near me, or are we going to be, I mean, far away because of the remote? But if you're in the same city, are you going to meet up periodically and show cuts and talk about it? So, I mean, all those nitty gritty details can really either kind of help or hinder a relationship. So I mean, they have talked about this, but I just want to really echo as someone who has studied relationships in a past career, how important it is to really talk about boundaries from the beginning. And even those details that may seem insignificant. Shazia, did you want to add something? I thought I saw you about this.
Oh, well,
Sure.
I was kind of pointing to Derek because I saw his camera go off or his, mic go on. I first want to say hi because there's quite a few Seattle and Seattle-ish people here. So hi, Seattle folks. Yeah, I definitely agree with Claire, like just, the initial connection that we kind of had. I think we were both eager. Like I was a first time feature director and she was first time, and there was something there as well where I could just feel there was something to lean on your intuition a little bit, on a person. And actually she wasn't even available initially and I was ready, and I had like 2 other people that I kind of felt pretty good about actually. But I knew there was something in my gut that was like, okay, the hunger was there for both of us. And so I do think like when you are kind of aiming for the same goal and have a same, similar energy, I think, which Claire and I have, though her energy is a little bit more than mine, but it still really worked out. So, just very much agree with Claire on how you feel and how a person is in general.
This doesn't work for every project, but I just want to echo Shazia. I was so impressed that you were willing to wait for the right person, because a lot of times people just want to get it done. Understandably, no blame, no shame there. But you waited, like you trusted your gut, you waited, she was the right person, and it really paid off.
It really did, honestly. And again, I had someone else that I was ready to go, and it's so woo-woo to say this, but I did get a little chill. Like I got chills when I spoke with Claire, and I knew that it was it. And I knew that it would be still okay for the project. And we were still filming so it did work out. And the hours that she put in was helpful as well. And I think later we're going to talk about how the time difference really helped us out as well. So, okay, Derek, your turn.
I just, Claire, you said, this is sort of your emerging editor and you're still learning or whatever, but I've been doing this for editing, and now I'm directing something this year, but I edited stuff for 15 years or something like that, and I'm still learning every time that I do a project. Every collaboration, I have done multiple collaborations with the same individuals, but most of my projects are somebody new, a few repeat offenders, as it were. But it really, I consider myself adaptable. I consider myself like able to, some directors like to be right here and like really wanna, but if somebody's like that, I always kind of have to throw my elbows a little bit and say, give me some time on my own. My favorite collaborations are the ones where I get to have like some time to go incubate something for a while without the director hovering. And that works for some directors, and some directors can't wait and get really antsy. Which is all understandable. There's a tension in this business which is a business between what's ideal for editors sometimes and what is ideal for the control of a producer, somebody to be able to monitor and do what they think, see things progressing as they think it should. So it's an interesting tension there, I guess. But yeah, I think I generally gravitate towards projects. There's sort of this thing happening right now, and it's not really what this panel is about, but story producers being kind of a role that sometimes, especially on these more series shows that exist. And I've had some good relationships with story producers, but a lot of times I find that you can get too many cooks in the kitchen at a certain point. Not always, but it's an interesting, there's no right answer, I guess, for what the dynamic should be, but it's definitely good for you to explore and figure out what works for you.
Yeah. Although I will say that one right answer, I think, is just talking about it, like the entire way through, beginning and even more so during the middle. of the collaborative process. So I'm going to switch us unless you all have anything else to add about this part of the conversation. Yep. But so before we get into the technical parts, talking about Miro and Trello and tools, I just want to hit the pause button for a second and apologize. I forgot two really important things. I want to thank Apple Original Films for supporting Pro all the year. And I want to especially thank Claire and the ADE for co-hosting this event. Claire has been an amazing collaborative partner for many months now, and she's a rock star, and it's been wonderful. And there's a link in the chat. I'll repost it again. If any of you are not ADA members and you want to learn more, I'll put the link there so you can learn more about the Alliance for Documentary Editors. So let's get more into the technical parts of this. And this is really where our speakers are going to be talking more and me talking a lot less. So let's talk about the collaborative tools that we're here to talk about, Trello and Miro. Can you give an overview of what they each are and why we might need to use them? And while you're thinking about that, in the Q&A, someone asked about tools for multiple editors. So can you also touch on, if you know, whether or not one or both of these tools are adequate for multiple editors to work on at the same time?
Yeah, I'll dive in just because, I feel like I can give a spiel to summarize. I think it's important for us to remember we are not sponsored by Trello or Miro. We're doing pros and cons. We're just giving you things that have worked for our workflows. There are other programs, there are other tools, and we are really focusing sort of on the collaborative, figuring out the story aspect, which is, I think, the biggest hurdle to documentary filmmaking is this blank canvas space where you have to brainstorm and conceptualize every single aspect of your film. So, we are focusing on these two programs as far as like giving specific experience, but that does not mean that they're the end all be all. And I don't think we're totally going to touch media management. This is sort of a creative collaboration space. So with that said, those caveats said, both Trello and Miro are used predominantly in like a storyboarding way. So in lieu of index cards on a corkboard or a whiteboard somewhere where you can move things around very tangibly, it's trying to find those ways to still connect and be able to reach through the computer and actively both have your hands on something if your director and your editor or multiple editors are not all in the exact same project at the same time watching a piece move on a timeline. So it's sort of a way of us eliminating the tech hurdle of everyone needing to be in an Avid or Premiere. They're different brains though. Trello is sort of very linear, very kept into lists. And Miro is really expansive and allows for webs and all kinds of limitless forms to be created. It might ultimately boil down to how you deal with chaos or mess, like what is your organizational style? But they both have pros and cons ultimately. And I think they can both get you to a finished film remotely. So we can dive into the differences there, but I think the baseline is storyboarding tool as well as like housekeeping, organizational things you're trying to keep track of. That's what they both do.
And do you know if multiple editors, Claire, can use both of these at the same time?
They can, and I think we'll get into like some of the, depending on your team size, might be part of your choice to do one or the other. There's certainly ways to do it on both for multiple editors.
Right. Anyone else want to add about any overview or any more you want to add about the overview of each tool and why you may use them?
I'll just say I think that Claire's right on. In my mind, coming into this today, I was thinking that like if you've used Excel more in your life, then you probably like Trello, and if you've used Photoshop more in your life, then you probably will gravitate more towards Miro. It's sort of like two different, as she said, two different kind of ways of using your brain, kind of.
That's awesome. I love that comparison. I think people can get that really quickly. Shazak and Sarah, do you have anything to add? If not, we can go on, but I want to just at least open the space. No. All right, so who would like to start? Which tool would like to start? Tool and team wants to start first with getting a little bit more into the nitty gritty. I think Claire and Shazak, is that right?
Sure, we can talk. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but we can definitely start. So Shazak and I used Trello, which I think is something that people are less familiar with. Like Miro, I think after the pandemic, it sort of emerged as like the true whiteboard. For me, my brain, it was too much. It was way too much. And then Shazak, and talking to her, I mean, Shazak, you can certainly feel free to come off mute too. Shazak, I would not say is the most tech savvy of us, but also wanted to be able to see, you know, like wasn't going to be in the Avid with me. But I also wanted to make sure that she could see everything that existed, and like was able to contribute and have a soundboard. So I think that's why we went with Trello.
Yeah, I definitely have used Excel more in my life. So it was more comfortable. And I also just really liked, and I'm not sure if Miro has little like images as well, but like it just helped, like there's little baby images there that it was helpful just to kind of feel the flow. And again, I'm not having all of the, you know, I'm not sitting next to her and seeing all of the footage. So it just helped understanding the scene to scene and all of that and how things might flow. And I also obviously just liked being able to get in there and move things around. And I did, because I am less tech savvy, I still took the Trello and put it on my wall just so that I could still just, sometimes I would just, I would just like stare at it. Whereas I don't want to stare at a computer screen, and it would just help that I could pace around the room and look and move. And then I would kind of move it on my wall and then move it, because for some reason it felt, I didn't want to like, it's not about messing it up, but I just wanted to like let it live and then be able to move it around and see how it felt on my wall still. But for sure. Are we going to share?
I'm going to screen share, and we're going to sort of walk through the setup process. So for a director who's not in the Avid, something that I've loved and learned to do is to create basically a master aerial view of all the footage that exists. For us, Shazak was a character in the film, but we had clear storylines. We knew we were following different people. We didn't know how they were going to intertwine, and we didn't know how it was all going to work together. But I made essentially the basic way that Trello works is you add a list, you call it whatever you want, and then you can start adding cards to it. So for us, when we started, I would watch the footage and take a screenshot, and it became like a representational still of what the footage was. Then in each card, you could make notes. So this can be a really great way for a director to let you know, hey, that scene had these types of things going on in it, or like, here was my takeaways. Without even watching the footage, there's a way to like create a visual representation where you can both include notes if you wanted. So each scene had its own card, right? Anything that could be a scene, even if that meant that there was something, whatever. If a day's footage actually had like 4 different potential scenes in it, I would make a still for each thing. I also ended up using this to track where I was in the process, which if you wanted to know, like as a director, you could chime in, and this list starts as 0% done. So when I would watch a scene, I'd mark it off. When I would cut out all the fat, I'd mark it off. When I would get it down to the good 5-10 minutes that I maybe want to make into a scene, that'd be, so it was a kind of, for me, like a way of tracking progress. And organizing the footage so that Shazak and I could talk about it kind of in what all exists for any single character, or any single storyline. So this is kind of where we started as a map. And I think Shazak, this ended up being the most helpful for you to just be like in the middle of the edit, like, what else did we shoot? What's happening? Right? Kind of like a soundboard.
For sure. Because again, not sitting in the edit, you kind of forget all of the footage and what's going on. And, oh yeah, I remember that scene. Even looking at it now, I'm just remembering all the stuff that we ended up cutting. So,
and all the darlings that live on the floor, for sure. So this is kind of our soundboard, right? Then when we got into the edit, I simplified this to just be one example, but ultimately I turned into index cards so that as the story evolved, we would move them around. We took an act, like a 3-act structure. So I would create, we created a list per act, basically. Also, if you're an Excel lover and a type A person, you probably want it to be color coded. So that aspect is in here. Also, keeping the storyline tabs as far as like individual characters were still marked as specific colors. So this is something that had evolved, and basically you can forever save every iteration that you ever make by just duplicating the board. So you never actually lose any work. You would just copy it and put a new date on it. You can start messing it around. This, I would say, the reason why we moved into the less visual space and used words was because I made an example because we didn't go this path. But the nature of docs, so I copied the footage board. The nature of docs is that like it's always evolving and changing. And if we tried here on Act 1 to keep up with the visual changes, we were pulling in archival, we were shooting more, we were, moving the meat of a scene, the VO that was, whatever, the exposition into different footage. So the stills started to be actually distracting and more upkeep to try to just keep up with how the film was shifting in a way that this tells you the point, the text told you the point of the scene without needing to keep up the visuals. So the visuals were amazing to remember what was there, but ultimately our structures came from like index cards. And these are amazing because as things moved, they're very easy to drag and drop. So each new cut, if something got cut out, we just made a little graveyard over here, of scenes, things that used to exist in old cuts. So we never lost sight of what used to be in a way that I think was really helpful. So this is what Shazak, I think, would take periodically and put on her wall in a tactile form. But Trello for us was very linear, and I think it was helpful. We went in knowing sort of individual storylines, which was helpful. I think you could make this much more exploratory in your early stages. If you didn't know Act 1, like your first boards could actually be a list here that is things you think are in the first half, things you think are in the back half. And they don't have to be so clearly identified to their purpose in the beginning. I think there's other things Trello can do, but I'm gonna stop talking now, I think, for now, so we can see Miro.
Claire, can I just ask you a quick question? You said you shifted at some point from the visuals to the index cards. Was that a conscious choice, or were you just getting too frustrated and confused by the visuals? How did you know to make that shift?
That to me had been a conscious choice at the beginning, just because some people like sticky notes or index cards that are just one word, a summary scene, like go gets coffee, and like you're supposed to know what that means. For me, I need more words on the card. So if we just took a still and I was changing why we were using that scene or how we were using it, the still didn't describe that to me. And like trying to look at the whole structure, it took burden off of us, I think, to just jot down the gist of what the scene had become or what we were doing there, kind of what we wanted the takeaway to be, as opposed to oversimplifying and relying on the stills to tell the story. Because we had verite, but we also had a lot of interviews that made any verite scene potential to be kind of shifted and refocused on something else. So relying on the still to do that work, I think, was actually too much to ask of it, as helpful as the visuals could have been.
Okay.
We definitely, if you were a visual person, like we could have done the upkeep of keeping a visual map on top of the index cards too, kind of separate, just so we could thumbnail view see the film. But at that point, I feel like you could just skim a Vimeo link. And it was just Shazak and I for the majority of the project. We didn't have a larger team. an assistant editor. Like we wouldn't have anybody else to task. Any of that was logistical burden on ourselves to upkeep. So I think it was just like a cost benefit analysis at some point.
And Claire, someone in the Q&A asked, and also I wonder, are you working from a template that Trello made for you, or did you start with a totally blank Trello screen and you created it yourself?
So what I love about Trello is it looks the same no matter what board you make. They always use this list form. That's how Trello works. Whereas Miro has all of these expansive different templates they can give you. Trello at its base form is about lists and organizational like trackers. So there isn't really, especially if you're on a kind of like the base level, any board you make starts as just something to add lists. So this was something that I sort of have adapted over time to that I found works. It's not that you need some special template to even get to this point. You just need to decide how you want to organize your footage. Maybe it's by character, maybe it's by shoot day, there's some things like that might determine how you set it up, but it should always look like that. You can like rely on Trello for that.
Got it.
And the still like the other part was like, it's a very easy program to use. You take a screenshot and you can drag and drop it on a card. There's no like special import process and resizing. It's just drag and drop and go. And it works just as well in the app on your phone. So I appreciate that.
All right, let's move over to Miro. And if you have any Trello specific questions, please put them in the chat. We will do our best to get to all the questions because I do see more in there. Let's move over to Miro so we make sure to give equal airtime to Miro and Derek and Sarah.
Sure.
Walk us through the pros and cons, please, and other tidbits.
Yeah, I'll kick things off and just share with you in a moment a board that I started for a short project that I worked on this summer. And Derek and I were supposed to have started our collaboration prior to this, but it hasn't happened yet. So we don't have tools. We can't speak directly to working on a specific project together, but we have worked on other films. We've both worked on Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering's films On the Record and Alan B. Farrow. So we are familiar with each other's workflow, but I thought it would be helpful maybe just to share this short because it's really simple because it's a shorter film and like the breakdown is maybe easier to follow in this context. So I'll just sort of introduce the very basic Miro whiteboard that is, I sort of have an aversion to learning new software programs. So this for me was like a very easy, quick translation from the literal, board where you take your index cards and pin them up and work out your structure. And so this looks to me almost identical. So let me share that. Okay, so you guys can see?
Yep, we can see.
Great, so basically this board is, again, it's like the color coding like index cards. And this was like a blank page. There's a lot of templates and maybe Derek will even talk about some of the ones that he likes, but I literally would just come over here and pick a color and make a key, and in this particular project, well, I'm gonna delete that, but in this particular project, it's a short that has a series of vignettes and we were organizing them by season. So you can kind of see there's winter, spring, summer, fall. And it's a really helpful tool in the beginning stages working with a director, because I would just sort of lay out what I identified as here's all the different pieces, here's sort of how I'm grouping them, and here's an initial structure. Here's a baseline, we can start here. And then there's also on this side of the red line, the alt vignettes, things that aren't currently in the cut, but could possibly be incorporated in later iterations. And so, you know, this was helpful for the director who would come in and she would put some notes on the side of specifically with the alternates, like, oh, maybe this one could go here, this one could go here. She wasn't necessarily manipulating the card so much. It was more through adding notes and comments to my structure that I would build. But I would say that like the, sorry, let me get rid of this. Here we go. But what I really love about Miro is a very simple thing where you can just duplicate, literally copy and paste, and then, you know, keep building structures as they go. So the next week I had to move things around a little bit and kept playing with it. And just, you know, as we built, you know, honed the cut, it became really helpful to be able to look back and reference earlier structures and have it just all right here. And I wonder, I'm sure there's a way to insert images. I like that about, I'm learning about Trello today too, everybody. So that was cool to see the thumbnails to see how that could help inform things too. But for me, this is just like almost like a one-to-one, like virtual version of what I used to do on the wall. And even almost better because I can see previous versions of it that I might want to return to in the edit.
Sarah, can I ask you a question about the note? You said your director left.
Yeah.
Can directors leave, or should they leave a note per sticky note, or like how did you know that note pertained to what on the board? Do you click on a sticky note and then leave a note?
You can make a comment directly here, like like
right.
this.
Okay. Yeah.
Like almost like a Google Doc, you know.
Right.
Or these were general notes that I think she made on the first structure iteration.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are people in the chat, Sarah, saying yes, you can add images into Trello via the tool with the up arrow on the far left side. There you
Awesome.
go. Thank you, someone, for educating us. This looks very similar to another tool that I have used in a past life called Mural, M-U-R-A-L. So I would also have a look at that if people are interested. And are both the versions you use, Claire and Sarah, are you both in free versions or are you in paid versions?
This one is free, which limits the number of collaborators. I mean, I think I haven't used this with large teams. It's usually just been like a director, maybe another editor. And so, yeah, I've been able to stick with the free version.
Yeah, they both have free versions and then paid tiers. And I think really the main drawback of free is like you can use it. There's just sometimes a cap on how many boards you can have. So I think for Trello, it's maybe 10. And Miro, I think it was like 3 or 4. But Miro, you need less because they're so expansive. I have been on both. I've been able to get away with the free version for a long time on Trello. The only time that I needed a paid version on Miro was with a series because there were so many people. So at that point, though, your production company should pay for it.
And Sarah, what do you like about this, and what frustrates you about this? And then let's move to Derek.
Sure. Yeah. I think the last thing I'll really just add about this is it's most helpful in the beginning working with structure, and because these are such general, you know, like ideas and very succinct ways of noting which scene or which element is being moved into this structure. So after a certain point, it sort of feels laborious and tedious to kind of keep duplicating and keep it up, because you just sort of, once you kind of lock in your structure, it feels like I just move on. But I will also say, like, this is one part of many remote tools that I'm using simultaneously. I think Derek can move into like, I think he's used in a more complex way, but I just thought this would be like a nice, quick little intro to it. So
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah, I think what you said, Sarah, about you don't use it, like you aren't updating the board at a certain point. It's a tool to get something done, but at a certain point you sort of, I'm sure I'm imagining, Claire and Cheswick, that you also weren't in, like you weren't updating the Trello religiously, like once you got into the zone with cutting stuff, and you would come back to it to sort of
I
update
think we
it
got to
after.
fine cut, and then it was like we were no longer exploring new material
Yeah.
in or how, so.
Once as you like get into a project deeper and deeper, and everybody, there becomes a shorthand among your collaborators for what you know what you're talking about, and you can visualize like how the Lego pieces are moving around. It becomes less and less important to sort of be able to visualize it. But usually I'll find myself like especially when you need to get another tier of notes from a producer that hasn't had their eyes on this project for a while, it can be really useful to like then update the thing and share it with them. Like, this is our structure. I will share my screen here now, and I have a couple of boards that I'll show just to show some other uses of this thing. Share screen, this guy. So one of the things that I really, that's like great about Miro to me is that this is my board right here. It looks tiny, right? But you can, it's vector based. So you have all this canvas space. This is a feature film. Each one of these things is kind of like what Sarah had. This is a feature film that I'm working on currently, called Caught Stealing. It's about a baseball team who had a little league baseball team who had a bank robbing coach. So we're in the middle of that right now. And we had, I'm directing this one. I'm also sort of a backstop for an editor, but because I've used Miro so much and because we had some time, we've done an extensive amount of beating it out in Miro first. And so you can see that like these were the first versions. And every time we would do, I would make a version, show it to my co-director, and our producer, and then they would make notes on things sometimes. You can see that like, and then I would change it. I would, make a new iteration based on that. And so you can do this non-destructive thing where you see kind of like how you had it in the past, and then you can see it sort of evolving and evolving. Oops. And like I said, it's kind of like Photoshop, like where if you want to, group a bunch of things together, you can easily just sort of do that here. There's a lot of like Photoshop looking tools in here, so I can group this together, and now anytime I click that, that's all one thing. So that's pretty free form in terms of like what you can do with this stuff. This is, here's the way that I usually build these is like, here's a scene, and here's like the beats that happen each individually within a scene. Obviously you can beat it down into act structures, and obviously like this is all like the film in the end, like these are best laid plans that you're looking at for this one. It's going to change from this as soon as we're starting to edit now, and it's changing. But my co-director, when selling to Netflix, they need to have they need to have holy shit moments every 10 minutes or so. So this is us visualizing like where and like how does this apply to here, and then we're going to do some recreation. So we have like a column for we're going to need to go to the horse track and get some 8mm footage for that. And then you can also do, and you can use images, and I've used images before, but we're also using it. I like doing this for some projects where it makes sense, where here's the actual like factual timeline of events for things that happened in our film. So each of these red things is where a bank was robbed. Purple things are where the baseball season was happening. And so we can all we put this information in once, and then anytime we're like, when did this happen in relationship to this? Actually, we come back in here and see. And these are like historical things that happened in 1963 when this happened. So it's really like the vector-based thing and the like kind of limitless duplication that really, makes Miro like a corkboard. Trello is more of a list thing. This is more of a corkboard thing. You can, if you don't, it can get unwieldy in here if you're not careful with this as well. But and so let's see, I have one other one here. This is
Derek, how do you stop it from getting unwieldy?
That's a big question.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not an editor, and that scared me what you just said.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just practice, I guess, or just like whatever makes sense for you. Like, for instance, I mean, this character arcs and threads thing, like on an iteration a little while back, like we decided to do that at a certain point. I guess I haven't duplicated that. I haven't necessarily updated this character arcs and threads thing as I've still been moving this stuff around. So now this is not quite lined up with this. But it's okay, like we're not too worried about it. This used to be living right next to here, and I used to track. But if I want to move some scenes around and I'm playing with the structure over here, I don't necessarily want to go. Get this out of here. Sorry. I don't necessarily want to go and update everything. It's a lot of work to like. The more layers you add, the more updating you have to do each time. And you can like link things, with that grouping function, so that if you're sure that things are tied together, then they'll move when you move other things up and down. But
can I chime in there?
Yeah.
In my experience working with Miro, the reason I default back for me personally to the Trello stuff is that everything has a potential to be a different size. So there is some, if you want things to look very linear or structured, like there is a little bit of like potential if you have multiple hands in it, multiple editors or a director in there, maybe they're using a different color coding system. Maybe they want the square sticky notes and you want the rectangle. There's just more options, right? It's like, there's so many options that I think that's where the potential for it to become messy is. It's just that like you determine either you're going to work over here or we're going to update them in this way using these types of things, right?
Because
to be fair, in the same way, like Trello, you can just duplicate a board and do whatever you want with it. But it doesn't impact the sort of the masters. Whereas like this, your version of that is like copying it into the ether, right?
Yeah, because I'm sort of in control of this thing, and our collaborator numbers are small. I don't have what I normally have, which is like I'll have a legend. So I'll have like red cards, and it'll be like, this means scene starts. Like I'll have a little box that says what each color means, so that if people want to add to it, they can. It's not for everybody for sure, but I've used this on a series as well. We had basically this, but it was like like say this structure, but it was like 3 different episodes. So you can just copy and paste. It was like these 3 episodes like this, and we had 3 columns of this going on. And it was helpful to be able to be like, okay, actually this scene makes sense over here in this episode. It was an easy way for the editors to collaborate with each other that way. This scale thing really helps me out, because then I can, you can really zoom in and focus, like, here's where we reveal the bank robber, and you can micro beat it. I mean, you can do that in Trello too. I think it really does come down to like how your brain works. There's not like a right way to do it. I'm going to show you just one other board, just shows you some other functionality. I use this in a different way, which is my friend had been working on this documentary for a long time about her parents, who were a priest and a nun, who like both broke their vows to then create my friend eventually. And this was, so she was having some structural problems with her film. So this was her film. And basically and this is what I do sometimes I find Miro to be a pretty good tool for like consulting. And actually it's interesting. I'll use both spreadsheet and then Miro to do consulting work. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll go through and watch somebody's film and beat it out kind of like this in a spreadsheet. So I'll have, here's your scene, here's a couple of the beats, and I'll just make their film on a spreadsheet, and then I'll write my notes like in a 3rd column or whatever. And then I'll translate this to Miro because then it's easier to slide around and play with the filmmakers all like, we can do it in real time. For this one, because we were remote and because they just kind of want to let me think about it for a while on my own, I did this and I took you can make little arrows that connect things to other things, and you can see like where you're moving scenes from one place to another. So this is what I they gave me their thing. I looked at it for a week or two, and then I showed up with this chart, and it was, as you can imagine, by looking at it, like daunting to look at it first, like having somebody rip your film up in a way that looks like this rat's nest. But then we just talked through it for an hour or two, and it was really, once they understood everything that was going on, they were really happy about the restructure. And so I basically took their film, gave them a version that was like this, and then kind of sent it back to their editor, their main editor on it. But that's another way that I've used this. And you can, just to bridge the gap, if you like highlight a section in here, where you might need to create a frame. So that if you take a frame, which is kind of just like a tool to isolate things, and you go export to CSV, it'll then make won't do it, but it'll then make a spreadsheet out of the cards that you have in order. So you can kind of,
Oh, that's cool.
in some way, you can kind of go back and forth between Miro Brain and Trello Brain if you want to, kind of easily with that tool. So I
Hey,
think that's-
Derek, going back to when you were showing timelines, Roseanne asks, can timelines be useful for behind the scenes work, even if your doc is not sticking to the linear timeline in the final product?
You mean like this timeline of events? Is that the question?
I think that's what she was talking about. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, in documentary, in this particular story that we're telling, we're trying to be very linear with it. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we, but a lot of times, sometimes it's more convenient dramatically for an event to fall differently than it, it's good for you to reveal something later than it might if you were just telling the story linearly. So, and you gravitate towards wanting, your mind is not always on what actually happened, but you're like, this would be great if this happened here. So it's good to be able to bounce back and forth from like down here, like, this is where I want it to live. This is where it actually lived ethically. Like, how do we navigate that? Like, is it a problem if we just sort of fudge it, or how do we word it, or how do we frame it to be accurate, but also like dramatically? So it's, yes, I mean, I always like to build a linear thing because you're always like playing with that tension when you're trying to tell a story, I think.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick, very general question. Are you all using a document for the script? So the cards are replacing, sorry, I see these tools replace cards on the wall tool for structure. Are you also using a document for the script? Like Excel or a Word doc?
For me, it depends on the collaborator. On this one, the guy, my co-director, he was a Trello guy, and I was like, let's do some Miro, and he likes it. He's settled into this with me, but he also made just like a Word doc version for himself, because he's like from a scripted, like a Final Cut background. So again, it really just depends on how your neurons fire, like what the most useful way to put it in, and do.
And we eventually had both as well. I'll say, like, we started this way, and then eventually we ended up having like that kind of script version.
We had a paper cut specifically because the cards didn't tell you, Shazik's voice in the film couldn't be tracked in cards. And so we got a paper cut, like a script together, so that we could see what her arc, how it was spoken, like what you were taking away from like literally the things she said. So I think that was still helpful. We have other tools, right? I think that once you get past the structuring point, that become more fine cutty, like those paper cuts maybe. I know some editors or some directors and editors like to start on paper cuts from transcripts. In our case, it was a lot of verite too, so we didn't collaborate through transcripts, though That's not to say that's like an archaic or wrong way to do it. I think those can be helpful for different projects. Sarah, I think you've used those a lot too, right?
Yeah, I would say it's been one of my favorite tools about working remotely with the director and getting specific notes is getting things transcribed in real time. So they're not perfect because it's AI, but there's a program called otter.ai, and I'm sure there's others. I think Trent is one. But it's very low cost. It's like, $10 a month or something. Like I would literally, anything from 2 minutes to 20 minutes to, I would, if I had something to share with the director, I would send it along with the transcript of that cut that can be turned around in like 10 minutes. And then director would make notes in there, and then you have the more reliable I think this is particularly helpful for interview driven. I will just say that because I was working on a highly interview driven project, and so then you have like the more reliable transcripts from the interviews where then the director would copy and paste bites. Oh, maybe this would work better here. And so we ended up having like a really great way of communicating, I think, on a more micro level within scenes and within, sections of the film using those transcripts. And they're definitely not perfect, but when you know the material so well, it doesn't tend to matter too much.
Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing, I have Derek, go on.
I was just gonna say the Premiere auto transcribe that came out like within this past year has really been leaning on that quite a bit.
So I have two directions I want to take us for the last 15 minutes. So if the editors in the chat could share with people any other tools you use, any other media management with a remote setup. People are asking a lot of questions, I think for the editors particularly, about media management remotely. Are there any other tools you use? If so, plop them in the chat. But the other big question that keeps coming up is, can you all give some more general advice or tips about working remotely between editor and director? So for example, Derek talked about too many cooks in the kitchen. How do you all navigate the relationships? How do you navigate the actual workflow back and forth if you're remotely? There's a lot of folks asking that kind of question. So again, if you have any tools you can put in the chat, people would really appreciate that. And then general questions about working remotely between editor and director.
If I could screen share one more time, I think there's one additional aspect of Trello that might also be helpful as sort of a housekeeping tool between collaborators. So we kept like a master links document. So you might be using Frame.io to put up your cuts and leave notes, or you might be using Vimeo with the review features. But in order to keep track of all those different links and different tools that we were using, essentially, I kept basically like a log of the main exports, where those things were. That would also be true for media logs. We were using Google Sheets for incoming shoots and tracking that type of stuff. So you could do that. You could implement something like these lists in a lot of different ways. You could track notes. You could have your notes come through in the comment feature. If you had a single link to a Vimeo of a review, Shayza could have left all her notes with time codes into this link and they'd be saved forever with the link. There's, I think, ways to potentially use tools like the list feature outside of structure, but actually for collaborating back and forth. You could make to-do lists. Say you had a request from the director, like, oh, can you like track this thing down? Or like, we need more information about this. You want to like track potential pickup shoots that you might need, or, there's a lot of ways I think to potentially use the lists to also keep track of the housekeeping stuff that come up from sharing notes back and forth, and trying to keep tabs on what other documents you're using. It could be a one-stop shop to just save everything.
Instead of
do that in Miro.
email.
Instead of email, where things get lost and cluttered, and it's hard, you might be inundated with other things. Whereas like this is like a sacred, you can make it your sacred space. So if you chose to, you could funnel all your notes through this, and you could tie them to scene cards, or you could tie them to cuts. And then, you know, I think you'd still Zoom. Like, I think Shazak and I Zoomed like every day.
Yeah, that's what I was going to tap into. I was just going to say, we were able, I'm on the West Coast, Claire's on the East Coast. So it was really great that like she would work all day and then post something. And I was able to get her notes like by the end of my day that she woke up to and had just that time. So she would be able to like process some things and even massage some things. And then we would get on a phone call and talk through it and kind of understand. So we definitely spent a lot of time on the phone, you know, just kind of going back. And the other thing that, again, I'm a first-time director. And so and in addition, it was a very personal film. So I wanted support on Claire's side because I don't want to say cloudy. I had my vision, but I'm also so, you know, connected to it. So I do just think that having flexibility a little bit, like what I'm like, hey, what feels good to start with for you, you know? So I was like really flexible on what felt good for Claire to like move with first, you know, versus me wanting to see something, this, that, and the other. And then I think the last thing that was like amazing was after we had worked together, I can't tell you how many months, though I'm sure Claire can, we'd worked together so long. And then finally like COVID had kind of eased up a little bit and I flew to her, and it was literally only, I feel like 3 days, and we stayed there. Like we barely slept, and it was
like a garbage table of like takeout while you're trying to finish the final days of the film.
We should have shared that screen. It was amazing though, to finally be in there. And I did understand the small things that I might have missed, you know, of just the try that, like when you're in the edit and it is happening and you are in those final stages and you could just like, hey, can you push this here or try this here? What do you think about this? Like, I feel like you miss a little bit of that, you know, when you are, you know, working from a distance, but big picture, it really did work for us. And then we did go through and, you know, we did all of our VO because I was literally recording on my phone. And we did all of our things at the last 3 days. And it was really amazing to work together, you know, for those moments and hug each other and just be like, oh my gosh, like, so yeah, I do miss in person. But I get the benefits as well of the remote because she was able to push through and I wasn't over her shoulder all the time.
Yeah, I do think that it did allow me to have some space just to like process separately than how Shazak was processing, especially because being close to the film and being in the film, I think it actually gave us some interesting boundaries. And then once we'd gotten into the process, like we didn't actually sit and watch the film together until much closer to the end. And that was its own sort of rewarding experience.
Let me go back to Shazak for a minute. Someone's wondering, how did Claire share daily cuts to discuss the next day, Vimeo or within Avid on Zoom screen share? So how did you share cuts?
It was Vimeo, right?
Vimeo. Okay.
Yeah, so we didn't screen share. You can, but like it wasn't perfect. We were in different time zones, so I would have had to either stay late for my evening to watch it together. It just gave us the flexibility to watch it things separately. That an exported cut where she could make notes and, you know, burn in time code was the way we did that.
And Sarah, Derek, do you have any advice about editing scenes together remotely? Either from your work together or from other projects?
I mean, I think that, so Sarah and I, we worked on, I think we were still kind of not exactly remote when we were working on most of our, I guess we were for Alan V. Farrow, but I was only kind of consulting on that one. But I worked with the person on a project that I was working at the end of last year. We had editors it was me in LA, was the lead editor. And then we had an editor in Florida and an editor in Scotland. And we had an assistant editor in Georgia, an assistant editor in New York, and it was based out of New York. So we were all like plugged into what they were affectionately referred to as the Bitcoin farm, piloting remote computers from in New York. And it was great. And like, it's even a more extreme version of what Claire and Jacek had, which is, Scotland was, but it worked out. We would, talk at the end of my day, at the beginning of her day. And so we could have editing going on around the clock. And so it was very, I guess in the remote collaboration thing, what I would say is like, you're going to get the most mileage. I don't know. One way that you can get a lot of good mileage is to be flexible and like share cuts. Sometimes people like to keep their sections, and like, I want to work on this and I want to, have my own section or whatever. But on that project, there was a lot of like share of like, I'm done with this section. Why don't you add X, Y, or Z to it while I'm sleeping? And so it just depends on how flexible, how much ownership people feel, how much like, sometimes having other people come in, like I said, too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes can be it really depends on how you're working with somebody. I guess I would say that there's not one correct answer for like how you should do it, but lean into like the benefits that can exist in remote. There's things that you can tap into if you can like wrap your mind around it and not be rigid.
I do think with the idea of there being too many cooks in the kitchen and everyone's wanting to implement ideas and brainstorm, that goes back to the top of our conversation about how you collaborate. What do you want? Like, do you want to be hands-on? Do you want to move cards? Do you want to be in space? You want to be talking on the phone a lot? How is it that you want to make this film together, and doing some of that assessing work? Because you might find that there are a lot of voices that expect to have a way of implementing notes or thoughts, and you have to pick the tool that might allow someone to do that, right? And then you have to yourself as a collaborator say if that works for you or not too.
I'll just say I learned the hard way. Like we learn many things, but specifically how directors want to give notes in a remote setup is like a very important thing, I think, to nail down ahead of time, because a project that I joined partway through was doing everything through email, and I couldn't. It was very hard for me to make sense out of following notes and tracking progress in email. And so, that element of Trello that Claire shared just towards the end, like keep the housekeeping stuff, that's awesome. Like I basically did that in Google Docs with a previous project, and that, just being able to know exactly where something lives, if you need the reference, if you need the link to something, and having it labeled and neatly in folders is probably why I'm an editor.
We have a few minutes left. Are there any media management tools that you all recommend? Just off the top of your heads.
I've used Resilio Sync in a remote project where I had a hard drive that was also connected with the director's hard drive. So our two computers worked as like a fake server, basically. So it basically just made sure that the drives were mirrored at all times. That's definitely an option to look into if you're remote and not actually on a server.
Airtable is one, if you're really into Excel, that I've seen people use in a really, you can create all sorts of rules that like you enter the data for an archival asset, and it'll automatically generate the name of the thing like for you, so you don't have to like do a bunch of copying and pasting. It's a little bit like Excel on steroids a little bit. I think that Trello can probably be used for some of those things as well. There's definitely like more of an organizational functionality that can be done there. I'm gonna just real quick share. This is Sarah. When I get notes, I mean, I think I don't know what you're sort of, but this is how I do. I have like a template that I use for when I get notes. Like here's some notes from a cut from Netflix. It's like the series I was working on is pretty far advanced. Every time I get an email, I just copy and paste the notes from somebody's email into this column. And then, this is me having notes on notes if they're like kind of why I'm doing things. And then this is the green stuff is like, this note was addressed as it was asked for, should be good. Yellow is like, I tried my best, but like, you may not like the results. And then red is like, I can't do this because we don't have the thing that's being asked for. And that's I use spreadsheets in that way to do notes. And generally like, this is the most organized way I've found to like make everybody happy.
I appreciate how organized editors are. That's all I'll say. Like, you all are so, it's incredible to me. So.
Someone wants to know, do you share project files, Premiere or Avid, with the director while editing?
I would if the director wanted to be in the project, like why not?
It's pretty rare in my experience that they have the knowledge to use Premiere or Avid.
Okay.
So, but for somebody asked about Frame.io, that's been like a huge tool for me for getting notes and cuts and everything. Yeah.
All right, we have 1 minute left. Any sort of overarching last minute tips and advice for people? Big picture stuff that you really want them to take away. A nugget.
Trust the process. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, there is something about once you get your person and you are working with that, as long as it does feel good, just trust, that it will flow. And there's rough moments for sure. And there were frustrating times when things didn't click, but we got through it. And, again, ended up doing a moment in person that really had it all come together.
Yeah, this process is messy. Like, not having a structure, not knowing the story is messy. And you go through really awful rough drafts until you figure it out what is working. And those things are necessary. So these tools hopefully at least give you some idea that you can at least keep track of those changes and what did or didn't work, and what you're trying to go for in the future, that ultimately gets you to finished film.
Yeah. These tools for me are very much about knowing what kind of brain you have. So as someone who has done a lot of work with people and understanding their brains, it's really important to ask yourself, am I more a Miro person, a Trello person, or a whole other kind of person? Because if you don't know what kind of brain you have, you'll get frustrated if you don't choose the right tool. So that is one big takeaway that I want to give you all. And I really want to thank our 4 lovely filmmakers, editors, directors, human beings for sharing your knowledge. I think you got hopefully a good taste of each one, but you clearly, I think on your own, need to dig a little deeper into each one to see which one works best for you, but also best for your team. So this is a wonderful overview of how they use these two tools. And now it's time for you all, because these are both free, at least they're free versions. It's time for you all to dig a little deeper and see what works best for your teams. So again, thank you to the 4 of you. Thank you to the ADE for co-hosting and Claire for all your collaborative work with me to get this started. And I really hope, I'm not going to exaggerate, I hope to see as many of you as possible in person in November at the DOCNYC Festival and the conference that I curate, because they're both pretty amazing events. We're in our 13th year of the festival. And I think that's it. We're at 1:16 Eastern time. Thanks to all of you. We appreciate all of you coming and appreciate you speaking.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.